I came to Galaxy Scientific University to study, not to fall for a fox-eared alien princess in heat, and definitely not to become a father overnight. But love doesn't care about species or interstellar politics. Thomas stepped off the shuttle, his heart pounding as he looked up at the towering spires of Galaxy Scientific University. It was his first day, and he could hardly believe it. Humans were finally studying alongside aliens from across the universe. He adjusted his backpack, feeling small but excited. This was his chance to learn, to prove himself among the stars. He followed the glowing signs to his dorm, room 17B. The hallway buzzed with strange voices, clicks, hums, and laughter from creatures he'd only seen in holograms. When he reached his door, he took a deep breath and swiped his keycard. The door slid open, and Thomas froze. Standing in the middle of the room was a girl. No, not just a girl. She was a Vulpine, a fox-like alien with sleek fur, sharp ears that twitched slightly, and a fluffy tail that swayed behind her. She turned, and her golden eyes locked onto his. She was beautiful, like a model from a magazine, but with an otherworldly charm that made Thomas's throat go dry. "Don't stare," he told himself, forcing his gaze to the floor. His cheeks burned as he stammered. Hi. You must be Arura, my roommate, right?" The girl smiled, her voice soft but confident. "Yes, I'm Arura. And you're Thomas, I assume? The human I've been hearing about." She tilted her head, her ears flicking with curiosity. "You're taller than I expected." Thomas blinked, unsure how to respond. "Oh, thanks. I guess it's the gravity back on Earth. Makes us sturdy." He winced at how awkward he sounded, shifting his weight. "Have you been here long?" "Long enough to claim the best side of the room," Arura said with a playful grin, pointing to the window where her bags were neatly stacked. "But don't worry, I left you some space. I hear humans like their territory." Thomas chuckled nervously, setting his backpack down. "Yeah, we do. I'm just happy to be here. First human class in the universe. It's kind of a big deal." Arura nodded, stepping closer. Her tail brushed the floor, and Thomas couldn't help but notice how it moved, like it had a mind of its own. "It's a big deal for us, too," she said. "Vulpines have been curious about humans for years. You're so unpredictable." "I like that. Unpredictable." Thomas raised an eyebrow, feeling a mix of pride and unease. "I'm just a guy who likes computers and stars. Not much mystery here." She laughed, a light, musical sound that made the room feel warmer. "Oh, I'll be the judge of that. I've read about your kind, strong, stubborn, always chasing something bigger. I think we'll get along just fine." Thomas scratched the back of his neck, trying to hide his growing smile. "I hope so. I mean, we're stuck together, right?" He glanced around the small room. 2 desks, a window with a view of distant planets, and a faint hum from the walls. It felt strange but exciting. Arura stepped toward the window, her tail swaying gently. "Look out there, Thomas," she said, her voice softening. "All those stars, we're part of something huge now. Don't you feel it?" He joined her, staring at the endless galaxy beyond the glass. His heart raced, not just from the view, but from the way she said his name, like it mattered. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I feel it." For a moment, they stood in silence, 2 strangers under the same sky. Thomas didn't know it yet, but something had already begun to spark, a connection he couldn't quite name. Thomas hauled the last of Arura's trunks into the room, wiping sweat from his forehead. The dorm wasn't big, but already felt like home, or at least it was starting to. Arura stood near the window, arranging a pile of blankets into something she called a nest. Her tail flicked as she worked, and Thomas tried not to watch too closely. "Humans are strong," she said, glancing over her shoulder with a teasing smile. "I knew you'd be useful." That trunk was heavier than a moon rock. He grinned, flexing his arm jokingly. "Earth gravity does wonders. What's all this stuff for anyway? You moving a whole planet in here." Arura laughed, her ears twitching. "It's my nest. Vulpines like to feel cozy. You'll get used to it." She paused, then added, "Speaking of getting used to things, we need to talk about the sleeping situation." Thomas's stomach flipped. "Sleeping situation?" He set the trunk down harder than he meant to, his voice cracking slightly. "What do you mean?" She turned to face him fully, her golden eyes steady. We share the bedroom. It's a Vulpine thing, especially now, during my mating season. Don't freak out, she added quickly, raising a hand as his face turned red. It's not what you think. Not what I think. Thomas echoed, his mind racing. Thomas leaned back in his chair, staring at the glowing grade report on his datapad. Another perfect score. He couldn't believe it. Weeks ago, he'd been scrambling to keep up with Galaxy Scientific University's brutal coursework. Now, he was topping the class. He glanced over at Arura, sprawled on the bed with a snack, her tail flicking lazily. Your pheromones are cheating, he said, half joking. Arura looked up, popping a berry into her mouth. Cheating? No way. I'm just your secret weapon. She grinned, her sharp ears twitching. You should thank me. Maybe I should, Thomas said, spinning his chair to face her. I've never been this focused. It's like my brain's running on rocket fuel. She laughed, sitting up. That's the Vulpine magic. Told you you're lucky to have me. Her bikini shifted as she moved, and Thomas's eyes darted away, his face warming. He'd gotten used to seeing her like that, sort of, but it still threw him off sometimes. Yeah, lucky, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. He couldn't deny it, though. Sleeping next to her every night had turned into something he looked forward to. Her soft breathing, the way she curled up under the blanket, it was weirdly calming. They'd started talking more too, late into the night, about classes, stars, anything. She wasn't just his roommate anymore. She was his friend. Arura slid off the bed and wandered over, peering at his datapad. Another perfect score? You're making me look bad, Thomas. You? Look bad. He smirked. You're the one who sleeps through lectures and still passes. I'm just trying to keep up. She nudged his shoulder, her touch light but enough to make his pulse jump. Keep up. You're ahead of everyone. I've seen how you study. Nose in those holograms all day. It's cute. Goo. Thomas raised an eyebrow, trying to play it cool. I'm a computer geek, not a puppy. Same difference, she teased, leaning against his desk. Her tail brushed his leg by accident, and he froze, pretending it didn't happen. He'd started noticing little things about her lately. How her ears tilted when she was thinking, how her laugh lit up the room. It was distracting, but he didn't mind. Whatever, he said, shaking his head. You're the weird one here. Who eats berries in bed? Vulpines, she shot back, popping another one in her mouth. And you like it? Don't lie. Thomas chuckled, caught off guard. Okay, fine. You're fun to have around. He hesitated, then added, I'm glad we're friends. Arura's grin softened into something quieter. She looked at him, her golden eyes steady. Me too. You know, most people I've met, alien or not, they stare at me like I'm some strange creature. The ears, the tail, all that. But you, she paused, her voice dropping. You're the first one who doesn't look at me like that, Thomas. You just see me. His throat tightened. He hadn't expected that. Well, he said, fumbling for words, you're not that strange. I mean, you're weird, but good weird. The best kind. She smiled, a real one this time, not her usual teasing smirk. Thanks. That means a lot. For a moment, they just sat there, the hum of the dorm filling the silence. Thomas felt something warm settle in his chest. Not the sharp buzz of her pheromones, but something softer, steadier. He didn't know what to call it yet, but he knew one thing. Having Arura around was starting to feel like home. Thomas rubbed his eyes, the glow of his datapad blurring after hours of coding. The dorm was quiet, except for the soft rustle of Arura moving around. Lately, she'd been off, tired, snappy, not her usual playful self. He glanced over, worried. She was pacing near the bed, her tail flicking fast, her ears pinned back. You okay? He asked, setting the datapad down. You've been weird all week. Arura stopped, her golden eyes darting to him. I'm fine, she said too quick. Just restless. Don't worry about it. Her voice had an edge, like she was holding something back. Thomas frowned. You don't look fine. You're pacing like a caged comet. What's going on? She sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's nothing you get, Thomas. Vulpine stuff. She turned away, but he caught the tension in her shoulders, the way her tail curled tight. He stood, stepping closer. Try me. We're friends, right? I can handle a little alien drama. Arura froze, then spun to face him, her eyes wide and wild. It's not drama. She cut off, biting her lip. Before he could ask again, she moved fast. In a heartbeat, she was on the bed, kneeling, her back arched, her tail swaying slow and deliberate. Her breathing hitched, and she looked at him with a hunger that made his stomach drop. Thomas's brain short-circuited. "Arura," he said, his voice cracking. "What were you doing?" She blinked, like waking from a dream, and scrambled back, her face flushing. "Oh, stars, no. I didn't mean." She hugged her knees, hiding her face. "I'm sorry, Thomas. That was stupid." He stood there, heart pounding like a drum. "Stupid? You looked like—" He stopped, unsure how to say it. She looked ready to pounce, like some primal switch had flipped. "Are you sick or something?" Arura peeked up, her eyes glistening. Then, to his shock, she burst into tears. "No, I'm not sick," she choked out. "I'm in heat. Full heat. It's worse than I thought." Thomas blinked, his mouth dry. "Heat? Like mating season heat?" He'd heard her mention it before, but this was different. This was real. "Yes," she whispered, wiping her face. "It's not supposed to be this bad with a human. I thought I could control it, but—" She looked at him, desperate. "You being here, so close, it's messing with me." He took a shaky breath, trying to process. "Okay, oh wow. So what just happened? You were like presenting yourself or something?" She groaned, burying her face again. "Don't say it like that. It's instinct. I didn't mean to. You smell good, and She stopped, mortified. "I smell good," Thomas said, half laughing despite the chaos in his head. "That's a new one. I'm flattered, I guess." "It's not funny." Arura snapped, but her lips twitched, fighting a smile. "You're making it worse, standing there all you. Me being me is the problem?" He raised an eyebrow, stepping back. "Okay, how we fix this? Cold shower? Lock me in the closet?" She shook her head, her voice small. "It's not that simple. We're too connected now. The pheromones, the sleeping together, it's built something. A bond. And now," she trailed off, her eyes locking on his. "We're in trouble, Thomas." "Trouble?" He felt a chill. "What kind of trouble?" Arura swallowed hard. "The kind where my body thinks you're mine, and it's not letting go." Thomas stared at her, the air thick with something electric. His heart raced, not just from shock, but from the way she looked at him, scared but fierce. He didn't know what to say, but one thing was clear. Whatever this was, it wasn't just her heat. It was them. Thomas lay awake, staring at the ceiling of their shared bedroom. Arura's confession about her heat still echoed in his head, a storm of questions swirling. She'd insisted they try sleeping apart tonight, separate rooms, separate beds, to break the bond before it got worse. He'd agreed, mostly because he didn't know what else to do. But now, alone in the main room, the silence felt wrong. Empty. He rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter. "This is fine," he muttered to himself. "Just need to sleep it off." But his skin prickled, like static clinging to him. He could still feel her warmth, her scent, like a ghost lingering in the air. His chest tightened, and he squeezed his eyes shut. "Get a grip, Thomas." In the other room, Arura wasn't faring much better. He heard her, a soft groan, a restless shift of sheets. It tugged at him, sharp and insistent, like a tether pulling him back. He sat up, heart thudding. "She's fine," he whispered. "She's fine." But the sounds grew louder, pained, and his resolve cracked like thin ice. He didn't remember deciding to move. One moment he was in bed. The next he was stumbling through the dark, barefoot, drawn to her like a planet caught in orbit. The bedroom door creaked open, and there she was, curled on the bed, her bikini clinging to her, sweat glistening on her blue-tinted skin. Her eyes snapped to him, wide and desperate. "Thomas," she rasped, her voice a thread. "What are you?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. The air sparked between them, a current too strong to fight. He crossed the room, and she reached for him, her hands trembling. Then it happened, a collision of need, like stars crashing in the void. His hands found her shoulders, her arms looped around his neck, and they fell into each other, a tangle of heat and breath. Time blurred, a rush of fire and shadow, until the storm broke, leaving them breathless. When Thomas came to his senses, he was lying beside her, the sheet twisted around them. Arura was curled against him, her tail draped over his leg, a soft hum in her throat, like a purr. His heart slammed against his ribs. "Oh my God," he gasped, sitting up. "Arura, are you okay?" I didn't mean." She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "I'm fine," she murmured, her voice warm, steady. Don't beat yourself up, Thomas. She touched his chest, right over his racing heart. "This is us. It's what happens when the bond takes over." He stared at her, panic mixing with something softer. "Us? You mean that was supposed to happen?" Arura nodded, sitting up slowly. "With Vulpines, heat and bonding, it's intense. I thought I could avoid it with you, being human. But..." She looked away, her ears drooping. "I was wrong. And now..." She took a deep breath. "I have to tell you something." "What?" Thomas asked, his voice tight. "What now?" Her golden eyes met his, serious and deep. "The bond, it's for life. I am sorry, Thomas. I didn't think it'd go this far." He blinked, the words sinking in like a stone. "For life?" He let out a shaky laugh, running a hand through his hair. "So what? We're married now? Just like that?" "Not married," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Bonded. It's bigger. And I messed up. I thought I could play with the rules, get the perks without the trouble." She sighed. "Guess I got the trouble." Thomas looked at her, the weight of it hitting him. But beneath the shock, he felt her, still warm against him, still Arura. "Trouble? Huh," he said softly. "Well, you're not the only one in this mess." She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You're not mad, Mel?" He snorted. "I'm freaked out. But mad? Nah, we'll figure it out." He paused, then added, "Together." "Together," she whispered, and the word felt like a promise. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. The room felt too small, the hum of the dorm walls too loud. Arura stood by the window, her tail still, her golden eyes fixed on the stars outside. The night before, the blur of heat and connection hung between them like a heavy fog. Then she dropped the bomb. "I'm pregnant," she'd said, her voice quiet but firm. "You're gonna have puppies, Thomas." "Puppies?" He'd choked out, half laughing, half panicking. "You mean kids? Right now?" She'd nodded, her ears drooping. "Vulpine pregnancies are fast. It's already started." Now, hours later, Thomas was still reeling. Fatherhood? He wasn't ready. He was a nerd with a data pad, not a dad with a litter. But when he looked at Arura, nervous but standing tall, he knew he couldn't walk away. "Okay," he said finally, breaking the silence. "So what do we do?" Arura turned, her face tight. "We don't have much time to figure it out. My family's coming. Soon." "Your family?" Thomas's stomach flipped. "Like your parents?" "Like my father," she said, her voice dropping. "He's important, and he's not going to be happy." Before he could ask more, the dorm's big screen flickered to life. A stern face appeared, sharp vulpine features, graying fur, eyes like lasers. Thomas flinched. This guy screamed authority. "Arura," the man barked, his voice booming. "What have you done?" Arura shrank, her tail curling around her legs. "Father, don't father me," he snapped. "I can see it on you. You're pregnant, partying your way into a mess again. What am I supposed to tell your mother? She'll be ashamed." Thomas watched Arura's breath hitch, her hands trembling. She looked ready to collapse, and something snapped in him. He stepped forward, sliding an arm around her and lifting her gently against him. "Hey," he shouted at the screen. "Lay off her. What's the point of yelling now? It's done." The man's eyes narrowed, zeroing in on Thomas. "And who are you, human?" "I'm Thomas," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "The guy who's in this with her. So stop degrading your daughter. She didn't plan this any more than I did. We're handling it. Handling it." The man's laugh was cold. "Implications human. You've ruined a political alliance. I'll have to give up 2 planets' resources to fix this mess with Xerxes." 2 planets. Thomas blinked. 2 planets? Who are you exactly? The man straightened, his tone icy. "I am Alexander IV, Emperor of the Vulpine Empire, you fool." Thomas's jaw dropped. He looked at Arura, still trembling in his arms. You're a princess? She nodded weakly, her head resting on his shoulder. Surprise, she mumbled. Great, Thomas muttered, his mind spinning. I knocked up a princess. That's a new one. Alexander glared through the screen. You've no idea the trouble you've caused. Xerxes will. Enough, Alex. A new voice cut in, sharp and warm. A woman appeared beside Alexander. Older, elegant, with Arura's eyes. Stop shouting. It's done. She never liked that little creep Xerxes anyway. Arura perked up slightly. Mother. Hello, dear, the woman said, her gaze softening. She turned to Thomas. And you're the human. Thomas, is it? Yeah, he said, swallowing hard. The woman, Arura's mother, studied him. Amen. I'm only worried about one thing. Humans flit from love to love like bees in a garden. How do I know you won't hurt my girl? Thomas felt the screen's lie detector hum, and he squared his shoulders. I'm not like that. I'm just a geek. Never even had a girlfriend before this. Arura's, she's it for me. N's lips twitched into a smile. Good. That'll make the bond stronger. Alex won't break it now. Alexander grumbled, but N waved him off. We'll sort this out, Thomas. Just take care of her. I will, he said, tightening his hold on Arura. She looked up at him, eyes wet but grateful, and he knew he meant it. Thomas stood in the dorm, his hands stuffed in his pockets, staring at the packed bags by the door. Arura's mother had been true to her word. Within a day, workers had arrived to move them out. College was over just like that. Now they were married, officially, in a quick Vulpine ceremony, and heading to the palace. But the real storm was coming. Arura sat on the bed, her tail curled tight around her. Her stomach was already rounding, impossibly fast, and her golden eyes flickered with worry. He'll be here soon, she said, her voice low. Xerxes, the noble I was supposed to marry. Thomas's jaw tightened. The guy your dad was trading planets for? What's his deal? He's powerful, she said, hugging herself. And angry. He thinks you stole me. He won't let this go easy. Great, Thomas muttered, pacing. So, I've got a pissed-off alien lord after me. Just what I needed. Before Arura could reply, the dorm shook, a deep rumble, like engines roaring outside. Thomas rushed to the window. A sleek ship hovered above the campus, its hull bristling with weapons. Vulpine guards spilled out, and at their head was a tall figure. Sharp ears, dark fur, a sneer that screamed trouble. Xerxes, he's here, Arura whispered, gripping Thomas's arm. What do we do? Thomas turned to her, his heart thudding. We face him. Together. He squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her against him. I'm not letting some jerk take you away. The door burst open, and Xerxes stormed in, his guards flanking him. So, he growled, his eyes locking on Thomas. This is the human who dares claim my prize. His gaze flicked to Arura's stomach, and his sneer deepened. And already breeding. Disgusting. Thomas stepped forward, shielding Arura. She's not your prize. She's my wife. Back off. Xerxes laughed, a sharp, cutting sound. Wife, you think a bond means anything to me? I'll rip it apart, and you with it. He signaled his guards, who raised their weapons. Panic flared in Thomas's chest, but then he remembered his datapad. He'd been coding defenses for a class project, hacking patterns into the dorm systems. Arura, get down, he hissed, diving for his desk. His fingers flew over the screen, rerouting power, triggering alarms. The room's lights flared, then died, plunging them into chaos. Xerxes snarled as sparks rained from the ceiling. Thomas grabbed Arura, pulling her behind the bed as guards stumbled in the dark. You're insane, she gasped, but there was a spark in her eyes, trust, maybe even pride. Insane's my specialty, he shot back, grinning despite the mess. He tapped the datapad again, and the dorm's vents hissed, blasting smoke into the room. Xerxes coughed, roaring orders, but Thomas was already moving, leading Arura out a side exit, his arm around her. Outside, palace reinforcements arrived, Vulpine soldiers loyal to Arura's father. Xerxes' ship retreated under fire, his curses echoing as he fled. Thomas slumped against a wall, catching his breath. Arura clung to him, her head on his chest. "You okay?" he asked, brushing her hair back. "Yeah," she said, her voice shaky but strong. You saved us." "Not just me," he said, nodding at the soldiers. "But I'd fight a whole army for you. You know that, right?" She looked up, her eyes shining. "I know, and I'd do the same." She pressed closer, her warmth steadying him. "You're more than a geek now, Thomas. You're a warrior." He chuckled, his heart swelling. "Guess I had to step up. Got a wife and kids to protect." Arura smiled, fierce and beautiful. "And I've got a husband to stand by. We're in this, war and all." The battle was won, but Thomas knew it wasn't over. Xerxes would be back. Still, as he held Arura, he felt it. A love forged in fire, strong enough to face anything. Thomas stood on the balcony of the lunar palace, the galaxy sprawling before him like a sea of lights. Below, the Vulpine capital glowed, its spires catching the twin moons' silver shine. It had been weeks since Xerxes' attack, weeks since he and Arura had faced the fire together. Now, everything was different. Arura stepped beside him, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. Their son, one of 3 from the litter, cooed softly, his tiny ears twitching. His skin shimmered blue like hers, but his eyes, those were Thomas's, wide and curious. The other 2 pups slept inside, watched by palisades. Thomas reached out, brushing a finger over the baby's cheek. "He's got your ears," he said, grinning. "And your stubborn stare," Arura shot back, her voice warm. She leaned into him, her tail brushing his leg. "They're special, Thomas. All of them. I felt it when they were born, something strong." "Special how?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She smiled, mysterious. "You'll see. They're not just Vulpine or human. They're more." Thomas chuckled, wrapping an arm around her. "More trouble, probably. 3 kids at once. We're in deep. Deep's where we shine," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "You proved that with Xerxes." He nodded, his mind flashing back to the war. After that first clash, Xerxes had returned with a fleet, furious and vengeful. Thomas had stepped up, using his coding skills to hack enemy systems, turning their own weapons against them. The Vulpine military followed his lead, and together they'd driven Xerxes out for good. Alexander, Arura's father, had watched it all, grumbling at first, then nodding in grudging respect. "You were amazing," Arura said, pulling him back to the present. "Father didn't want to admit it, but you won him over." "Yeah, well," Thomas said, smirking, "I had to. Couldn't let him trade you off to some jerk again." She laughed, soft and bright. "No chance of that now. You're stuck with me." "Good," he said, his voice dropping. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The palace doors slid open, and Alexander strode out, and at his side. The old emperor's stern face softened when he saw the pup. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "you've made a mess of things, human. But you've cleaned it up too." "Thanks, I think," Thomas said, scratching his neck. "You're not still mad about the planets, right?" Alexander huffed. "Ive Agustid. The Empire's stronger with you two anyway." He glanced at Arura. "Your mother and I have decided. You're the lunar princess now. And you, Thomas, the lunar prince." Thomas blinked. "Prince? Me? I'm just a guy with a datapad." "Not anymore," and said, stepping forward. "You're family, and we're retiring, going to watch over Arura's sisters. The Empire's yours to guide." Arura squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. "We'll do it together, like always." Thomas looked at her, then at their son, then at the stars above. His life had flipped upside down, college kid to father, husband, prince. But with Arura beside him, it felt right. "Yeah," he said, smiling. Together, Alexander clapped his shoulder, harder than necessary. "Don't mess it up, boy." "I won't," Thomas promised, meeting Arura's gaze. She was his anchor, his fire, his star. And he'd protect her and their family, no matter what. Thomas leaned against the balcony railing, the cool night air brushing his face. The lunar palace shimmered behind him, its halls quiet now that the day's duties were done. Years had passed since he'd arrived at Galaxy Scientific University, a nervous kid with a datapad. Now he was here, under the twin moons, a prince of an empire he'd never imagined. Arura joined him, her golden eyes catching the moonlight. She wore a flowing robe now, a far cry from the bikini days, but her tail still swayed with that familiar grace. Their 3 children, grown into curious, clever toddlers with sparks of strange abilities, were asleep inside, watched by, and Thomas smiled at her. "Long day, huh?" "Too long," she said, stepping closer. "Trade disputes, council meetings. I'd rather be back in the dorm, dodging Xerxes with you." He laughed, the sound warm in the stillness. "Yeah, those were wild times. Hacking vents, running from angry nobles. Good thing we're better at ruling than fighting." "Are we?" Arura teased, nudging him. "You still argue with father like it's a battlefield." "Old habits," Thomas said, smirking. "He respects me now, though." Took a while. She nodded, her gaze softening. "He does. And she paused, resting a hand on his chest. "I'm proud of you, Thomas. Back then, you were just a human who stumbled into my life. Now look at us." Thomas looked, too, at the stars above, at the empire they'd shaped together. He thought back to those early days, her teasing grin, the awkward nights sharing a bed, the chaos of her heat pulling them into something bigger. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice low. "From roommates to this." "This," she echoed, leaning into him. Her warmth steadied him like always. "Do you ever miss it? The simple stuff?" "Sometimes," he admitted, wrapping an arm around her. "But then I think about you, about us, the kids, everything we've built. And I wouldn't trade it for anything." Arura tilted her head, her eyes searching his. "Not even for a quiet life back on Earth." "Nope," he said, grinning. "Earth's boring compared to you. You're my galaxy now." She laughed, soft and bright, then pressed her forehead to his. "And you're mine. Always have been, even when you were too shy to admit it." "Shy?" Thomas huffed. "I was cool under pressure. Saved your tail, literally." "Sure you did," she said, her tone playful. "But I saved yours too. We're even." "Fair," he conceded, pulling her closer. The moons hung above, casting their light over the palace, over them. He thought about the journey, every fight, every laugh, every quiet moment like this. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "if I could go back, I'd still choose you." Every time. Arura's smile widened, fierce and tender. "Good. Because I'd chase you across the stars if you didn't." They stood there, wrapped in each other, the universe stretching out before them. Thomas felt it deep in his bones. Love wasn't just the spark that started it all. It was the strength they'd grown into, the life they shared, the promise that held them steady. And under those moons, he knew it would last forever.